Hi, Kate here with another video, and I hope everyone is doing well. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Helps me build the channel. I'm up to 250 something subscribers. I really do appreciate everyone who has subscribed. Occasionally, I lose a few subscribers. I think it's mostly the algorithm. It suppresses leftist content. Occasionally, someone might get annoyed or angry at something I say, but I think most part it's the algorithm. So I do appreciate everyone who subscribes. That does help me out a lot. This video is on Trump's war against immigrants and the war against everyone else, the move towards authoritarianism, and the Democrats are solidly a part of this. I want to emphasize, as Greg Stoker said, the Democrats, Trump is sitting on the throne built by the Democrats. I'll explain this. They're part of this every step of the way. The opposition is basically performative. Okay, before I get into this little current events, I'll talk about the proxy war in Ukraine. I see it as a proxy war. The Russian-Ukraine war is a proxy war. It's a horrific situation. It's been going on for like 3 years now. Over 3 years, horrific situation. In Ukraine now, they're press gang people off the streets, press gang men off the streets to serve in the military. As horrific, I've seen at least a couple of weeks, probably 8 or 9 videos of this. It's horrific. They usually die a few days after being sent to the front. Very high casualty rates. As I understand, this is mostly happening in Russian-speaking areas, like around Odessa. Saw a video of a guy walking his dog, a guy riding a bicycle, and the van pulls up. They pulls up to him, they bring him into the van, or they're often just snatching people off the street. These are like mafia groups which contract with the central government, and they have their quarter of people that literally snatch you off the streets, and they die shortly after being sent to the front. It's horrific. And so I see this as a proxy, and these are in Russian speaking areas like Odessa. Uh, Men in Ukrainian areas either have fled the country or dead. One thing, a statistic I read, something like 40% of the workforce of Ukraine is gone. They lost 40% of their workforce. The country is destroyed. I blame the US for pushing Ukraine into this brutal proxy war. So Trump made noises that he was going to end the war. He's blamed on Biden. Oddly, this is a liberal war. Liberals support the war. I kind of oddly, but it's a liberal war, or seen as a liberal and Democratic Party war. Is Biden's war. So Trump going to say he's going to end it within 24 hours. I don't think anybody believed that, but he said he was negotiating with Russia, which is a good thing. But quickly ran into a quagmire, wasn't going anywhere. Basically, Trump wanted like 1.0 off the 30-day ceasefire or wanted to freeze the conflict. It was just not acceptable to Russia. Okay, the background is Russia sees this as an existential threat. They can accept nothing less than recognition of the 5 regions of Crimea, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye as part of the Russian Federation. Full recognition of that, denazification in the Azov and the Banderite groups. They're politically powerful and they're bitterly anti-Russian. It's dangerous for Russia to have these around. They want a government acceptable to Russia, get rid of the Zelensky regime, and absolute certainty that Ukraine will not be used as a forward base to invade Russia. That's what this is all about. And Russia can accept nothing less than this. And the West and the U.S. has shown its agreement incapable. Like every agreement U.S. has made recently, the U.S. has broken. The Minsk II agreements, Poroshenko, Merkel, and Hollande have even said we didn't really mean it. We just did it just to buy time. I mean, Russia knows damn well they can accept nothing less than total victory. So it's nothing. Trump didn't really offer them anything. The 30-day ceasefire, tried to negotiate some kind of frozen conflict. And then, so I think Brian Berletic was one of the most prescient, best observers. So it looked like, anyway, so it looked a couple months ago and Trump was scolding Zelensky. I was happy. It was gratifying. I never liked Trump at all, but it was gratifying scolding Zelensky and Trump and Vance were, but and then Zelensky, mean old daddy Trump, was yelling at him, so he went to Europe, and Mama was cheering him up. Keir Starmer and Macron and Merz in Germany. Oh, because mean old daddy yelled at you, but don't worry. The Europeans were looking like they were going to go their own way. Brian Berletic, I think, was one of the most astute observers in all this. It was political theater. I mean, mostly political theater. It was it was a division of labor. Basically, what Trump and the U.S. wanted to, even before Trump assumed office, he wanted to like make a frozen conflict and then pivot to Iran and China. Once they were out of their way, he'd go back to Russia. And everybody kind of knows this. It didn't work. As they were talking at cross purposes. Scott Ritter I generally like him, but he was a bit unhinged, some of his recent stuff. He was on Danny Haifong. Danny Haifong interviewed him. He was like yelling, "You don't understand. Trump's a revolutionary. He's going to change everything." Okay, I don't like the way Trump treats immigrants or LGBT people. Okay, but foreign policy is a revolutionary. He's going to, and then, it's nonsense. Then even Scott Ritter had it very gradually. Okay, he's getting vetted. Bad advice from the neocons. Tim Walz. I think it was Walz who was national security advisor, giving him bad advice, and he shouldn't listen to these neocons. And finally, even Scott Ritter had to admit that this is not going anywhere. It's not going to end. I think Brian Berlitic had the best take on this. So Trump is completely pivoted. Now he's selling giving more weapons to Ukraine, ramping up support. And not just that, he gave Zelensky the go-ahead to use long-range ballistic missiles. And he said, "I want you to guarantee you can hit Moscow." This is scary. This is the same crap that the Biden administration did. Biden didn't know what was going on, but Blinken and Sullivan, whatever, they were two incidents. They were giving the green light to allow Zelensky to use long-range ballistic missiles against Russia. And Putin said they considered an act of war. This is nuclear footsie with Russia. And Putin kind of went around it. They've orogenic missiles, which is almost so he could counterattack without using nukes. So kind of that situation was diffused somewhat, but now we have it again, and this is kind of disturbing. Jim Kavanaugh, whom I've interviewed, he's a friend of the show. I've interviewed several times. He said, a couple of years ago, and he's still saying this now, there's like a 50-50 or maybe more than 50-50 chance of this going nuclear. It's an existential threat for both sides, for Russia and for the West. If NATO backs down, the West clearly loses. It'll be the end of NATO, possibly a big step towards the end of U.S. hegemony and European hegemony, and they know this. It's kind of both sides are locked into this. I don't know how it's going to play out. Most likely could go on for quite a while. Russia is winning, but very slowly, the withering drone fire from the Ukrainian side, and going very slow. So Trump completely pivoted. And now he's like, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. The thing is the Epstein case, okay? It was 2019. Epstein was a financier, billionaire. He had an island. He was known to be like pedophilia and child trafficking, horrible stuff going on. And several hundred women were involved in this, or boys too. And large parts of well-connected corporate and political leaders were implicated in this. And I think it is important. Now, I know some people on the left feel a little uncomfortable with the Epstein thing. It's a conspiracy theory. This guy, Doug Green, he used to be a friend. I know him in real life. I used to consider him a friend. I've interviewed him when I first started my channel. He had some interesting stuff to say about the Democratic Party. Doug hates my guts. He blocked me everywhere on social media. He's like a type of purist. Probably thinks I'm a fascist or something. Doug and some of his friends on Facebook were discussing how they were hoping the Epstein thing would go away. It wasn't Marxist enough for them, which is so short-sighted. This is important. This Epstein case implicates two U.S. presidents who were very heavily involved in this, Trump and Biden. Trump apparently, his Secretary of Commerce was literally Epstein's next-door neighbor. And both these, as individuals, were very heavily involved with Epstein. 3 U.S. universities, Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, big scandal rocking MIT, the computer science department. They accepted a huge amount of money for Epstein. Marvin Minsky and top-level famous computer scientists were heavily involved. Of all people, Noam Chomsky was involved in Epstein. I'm not saying those people were pedophiles. I don't think they were. I'm not saying that. I'm saying he was a known pedophile, known child trafficker, known what he did, and many elites were heavily involved with him just the same. And Harvard, MIT, and Stanford were involved. The British royal family, Prince Andrew was heavily involved, almost destroyed the British royal family, and came close to taking down the House of Windsor. Large part of Silicon Valley, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and Zuckerberg were involved. had some involvement. Part of the Murdoch press had some involvement. I mean, it was now what Epstein Hart was a blackmail, compromat, espionage operation. I'd say Zionist, not so much controlled by Israel, but controlled by Zionist oligarchs. And it was a compromat operation. So the Trump people made a big thing about this. The MAGA movement made a big thing about this. Where we're gonna expose the crimes of the deep state, these vast pedophile networks. We're gonna clean up everything. We're gonna drain the swamp. Came out and Pam Bondi, Attorney General, said she has the Epstein folders on her desk. We're ready to release this. All of a sudden, nothing. Crickets. They said, well, there's nothing there. Pam Bondi, oh, there's nothing to release. There's nothing there. And Trump even insulted his own base. So, I don't want these people. These people think there's something to Epstein. What are they talking about? I don't want these people around. And this is a political earthquake in U.S. politics. Be like, what's going on here? And they had Trump's supporters had this expectations for a long time now. Trump is part of the swamp, solidly a part of this disillusion overnight, a huge part of his base. This is also added to some belated concern about the genocide in Gaza, which is beyond horrific. And I may make another video about it. It's utterly horrific. And some of the right is kind of waking up a little. People like Candace Owen or a few other figures are kind of, some of the MAGA people, kind of belatedly waking up a little bit to this as well. So it all comes together, makes it look like Trump is controlled by Israel. It's more complicated than that. It's not quite, Max Blumenthal talked about it, a little bit more complicated, but it looks that way. And, the Epstein thing does not obviate a Marxist analysis. Some people were upset it wasn't Marxist enough for them. So there's like conspiratorialism is believing like the Illuminati or the Freemasons or shape-shifting reptilians are running things, which of course is nonsense. A Marxist analysis is a systemic materialist analysis. Okay, yeah, of course. But that doesn't mean conspiracies are when the ruling class does things. And they do things all the time. And, it's not, the term conspiracy theory was popularized by the CIA in the wake of the Kennedy assassination to discredit anything that went against the mainstream. Okay, that's stuff going on. Okay, so we know this stuff goes on all the time. It doesn't necessarily negate a Marxist analysis at all. So some people on the left have a really odd, I think it is important. Also, a friend of mine said it's kind of like the affair of what's called the affair of the necklace. Marie Antoinette was involved in this complicated corruption scandal about a necklace she bought from an Austrian jeweler. And it was a big scandal back in like 1780s. This didn't create the French Revolution, of course. It was a contributing factor. This is similar to this. It's disillusioning wide layers of U.S. society against the ruling class, both factions. Even liberals are talking about it now. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So I think this is important. And it's rocking the Trump administration, might even take down Trump. I don't really know. Okay. So, now to get back, so immigration. I'm going to have to talk a little bit about the history of U.S. immigration policy. It's complicated. It's hard to get really good information on this. I went through Wikipedia stuff online, read tons of like basically centrist policy wonk stuff. It's very hard to get an exact grip on different presidents' immigration policy. Tons of this like centrist political like policy wonk stuff, which a lot of us kind of misses the point. But okay, anyway. But what I know, okay, first of all, U.S. conquered 1840s after the Mexican-American War, 1850s, conquered a third of Mexico, really, became the U.S. Southwest. And it was kind of real, most of it was sparsely populated. Southern California had cities, population, parts of it were, but it was essentially conquered from Mexico. Long battle for Texas. The not well known, the Comanche Wars, Native American tribe controlled a big part of Texas. And they fought against both Mexico, Spain, Mexico, and the U.S. A long war. Also, coastal Mexico, a long struggle of indigenous people to control the coast of Texas. This is not well known by a lot of people. So, anyway, later on, 19th century, Porfirio Diaz, president of Mexico, and later revolutionary governments during the Mexican Revolution, they kind of discouraged Mexicans from coming to the U.S. Mainly, they thought they wanted the labor. Mexico was short on capital, but they needed labor. They tried to discourage us. Anyway, during the Great Depression, early Herbert Hoover administration, the U.S. deported 1 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans. Many of these people actually were U.S. citizens. I don't know how many, but many were. And some of these people did not actually speak Spanish, but the U.S. federal government, state government just dumped them in Mexico. Uh, this continued under Franklin Roosevelt. He blocked the federal government, ended the federal government from doing this, but he still allowed some state governments to deport Mexicans. These were Mexican Americans, Mexican immigrants, Mexican people who were just who were living there. Just dumped them. I assume some of these people eventually made their way back to the U.S. Fast forward, there was the Bracero program from like the middle of the Second World War until the 1950s, for Mexican laborers to work in on farms in the Midwest and so on. As I understand, it's kind of like indentured servitude. These people were closely controlled by their employers, but okay, and there was the Operation Wetback, where the Eisenhower administration deported a lot of Mexican people. Okay, fast forward, modern era starts during the Reagan era, Reagan-Bush administration, during the 1980s. There was the 1986. There was the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which legalized the status of close to 3 million people, undocumented immigrants, mostly from Mexico, living in the U.S., legalized their residency in the U.S. It was a good thing. A bit odd, because the Reagan administration was fairly right-wing. Immigration was not a major issue back then. And there's some political trade-offs. Theodore Hesburgh, who was a president of Notre Dame, a liberal Catholic activist, he was kind of a player at the time. He was kind of influential, and a few other factors were. And it's a good thing. Part of the deal, they legalize these people living in the U.S. while cracking down on border crossing to some extent. So this was so. Also, it was with penalties against employers who knowingly hired undocumented workers. That would be cracked down on. So if that you had to show to applying for a job in the U.S., you have to show 2 forms of ID, driver's license, and social security card. Before that, you didn't have to do this. This increased the paper trail. Yeah, you need to get a job, things like this. Okay, there's Simpson-Mazzoli Act, 1986. Okay, fast forward, Bill Clinton. A lot of the legal machinery for deporting immigrants was developed during the Clinton administration. So there are 2 areas, San Diego, California, and El Paso, Texas, where a lot of people from Mexico, mostly northern Mexico, migrant workers would cross the border. Was officially illegal, but kind of understood. The powers that be kind of let this go on. It was kind of understood, and people would turn a blind eye to it. My understanding, and they'd come to the U.S., work for a few months seasonally, go back to Mexico with their families and things like that. Okay, this has been going on for a while, kind of understood. Okay, so there were a lot of complaints from some of the residents of these 2 cities, San Diego and El Paso. So Clinton decided he'd crack down. It backfired. He'd make these border crossings much more difficult. This backfired big time. Basically, now people were afraid of being separated from their families, so now hundreds of thousands of people started crossing over, and they avoided, like San Diego and El Paso, went to Arizona, rural areas of Arizona, and people complaining the immigrants are sneaking through in their backyard. It kind of made the situation much worse. By the way, I want to emphasize I'm pro-immigrant. Completely, I believe in. I don't believe in borders. I believe unrestricted immigration, completely open borders. I don't support the bourgeois state at all. I have more in common with a dirt poor immigrant than I do dirt poor immigrant than I do with some Silicon Valley tech bro. A couple of years ago, and I worked in the Boston area like 10 years ago, and one instant I lost my wallet at $50 in it. And I was panicking, stressing out about it. Well, someone called my dad, and somebody apparently found it. And I met this person. It was a Bolivian guy, Bolivian migrant worker, I assume. He didn't speak English. He didn't speak Spanish. He either spoke Quechua. He had someone with him, and they kind of indicated. And he gave me the wallet with the $50 still in it. Like, whoa! I don't know too many native-born Americans who would do something like that. Whoa! I was really impressed. I do feel more in common with these dirt poor people coming into the U.S., like working class solidarity, than I do with the tech bros or whatever, or the NPR liberals. Okay. Anyway, so get that out of the way. I meant to say this at first. So, okay, Clinton administration. More people started coming in. He tried to crack down on it, backfired. couple other things were happening. There was the Maquiladora program, basically industrial hub in northern Mexico. It started dates back to the mid '60s, but it took off in the '80s. There were tax breaks and like attempted to develop like a special economic zone like they have in China, and it attracted people from like southern Mexico would go north, and some of these people would cross over, just keep going into the United States. That was a factor. Another factor was NAFTA and various other trade agreements, which devastated the economy, particularly southern Mexico. Chiapas wrecked the economy of Chiapas, and large number of immigrants were now coming from southern Mexico. They're desperate for a better life. And the big thing with the Contra Wars during the Reagan and Bush era, U.S. Created these vicious right-wing guerrilla groups, which were destroying any attempt to create a better life for people. And the northern, it's called Northern Triangle, Central America, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and Cuba, the horrific U.S. blockade against Cuba, devastated these countries. So by the end of the Clinton administration, hundreds of thousands of people were coming in. And it wasn't always one way. People would come in and go back, but okay, that was the situation. And Bill Clinton organized a cooperation between different levels of state, different levels of government. Okay, fast forward again, Bush administration, 9/11. So the Department of Homeland Security was established, and I believe 2002, ICE was founded. ICE stands for Immigration Customs Enforcement, and subsumed what had been the INS, Immigration Naturalization Service. La Migra subsumed that. I guess INS still technically exists, but it's part of ICE. ICE has two groups. One is the two ICE. Let me look at my note here. So the Homeland Security Operations, one section, investigative branch. The other branch is called ERO, Immigration and Repatriation Operations. They're the horrible one, that highly controversial, everyone hates. Two branches of ICE. Okay, it was established under the Bush administration, and there were beginning of ICE raids. The workplaces. They'd go to workplaces. They'd go to people's homes. They'd two-tier type raids. But a lot of people on the left were really outraged by this. Interesting story. I was in the ISO at the time. I was living in the Boston area. I was in this group called the International Socialist Organization. I was in it for just a few months. I have a very bad opinion of them now, but I was in it for a couple of months, and I went kind of story. We went to there was a big rally, pro-immigrant rally outside on Providence, Rhode Island, outside the detention facility, where they're having these ICE raids, and the people from the Mayan community, Guatemala, there's some Catholic nonprofit, I forget what it's called, but it was organizing these people. Socialist groups came, and I was to show solidarity. I was in the ISO, but I wanted to take a week off from. They were very active. They were doing a lot of stuff, go to protests. I was doing a lot of this with them. I wanted to take a week off from activism, not do anything. So some friend of mine who was in Socialist Alternative, which was a rival group, these two groups knew about each other. They were in the Boston area. They were rivals. So I went with this friend who was in Socialist Alternative. We didn't even want to go to this ICE protest. Sure. And I didn't know that ISO was even involved in this. I didn't hear anything. So we got there. I felt a little awkward. There were tons of comrades from the ISO, and I was with someone from another organization. I felt a little awkward, but no big deal, whatever. Then my branch. So I was in this ISO branch, Boston branch, and they assigned a mentor to like a new member. So my ISO mentor, a grad student named Julie, she spotted me. She took me aside and she scolded me. Not for doing stuff with another socialist organization, but for being there at all. Like I wasn't assigned to be there. I was supposed to stay at home and study their literature. I wasn't. I mean, I thought the whole thing was so weird. I left a few weeks later. I basically left the ISO, and then I joined Socialist Alternative. I thought they were on a higher intellectual level. Later, I had some problems with them, but I switched from anyway. So whole story there. So anyway, a lot of people on the left were really outraged about Bush's ICE raids, but apparently people outside the left didn't really care about that. It was normies, non-political people didn't see what the big deal was. I was outraged by it. Okay. Anyway, Obama got in. Interesting. Obama massively ramped this up. He apparently deported twice the number as Bush. Yeah, but he deported twice the number as Bush. By the way, I meant to say that during his ice raids under Bush, the Monthly Review, which is a Marxist digest, I read it occasionally. They had a famous article which is making the rounds that, talking about Bush's attempts to deport immigrants. It was happening same time during the Iraq War, and some major expelling immigrants. This happened historically other times compared to the 1860s. And of course, it was impossible for Bush to expel. There were something like 11 million, 10 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. at that time, and it would be impossible for him to expel all of them, of course. The idea was to keep these people terrified, scared, and unable to organize, keep them in precarious situation. So helping immigrants helps everyone. Helps everyone raise. So that was going. So Obama got in. Obama actually doubled the amount of deportations and massively increased ICE funding. The size of ICE really increased. So, a couple of things. Obama, he wanted to work with Mexico to stop people coming over, and from 2010 to 2016, the U.S. and the Mexican governments together apprehended 1 million people, refugees trying to flee from the U.S. from uh from Mexico and other countries, many people from Central America now, and the U.S. deported like people on the board, like 800,000 people, including 40,000 children. Apparently, 10% of the population of the Northern Triangle countries of Central America emigrated. 10% of the population because of the devastating effects of U.S. policy there. And Trump tried to shift the responsibility for apprehending immigrants to Mexico. There were reports of brutality, particularly southern Mexico, Mexican police, reports of brutality. Also, um, from 2008 to 2016, Obama deported 2.5 million people, something like over 1,000 people per day. He was nicknamed the deporter in chief. He deported more people than Bush before him. And this lost him a lot of Hispanic votes during the 2000 during the elections, almost double the amount that it could under Bush, and also Obama formalized the deportation procedures, which meant essentially making it more difficult to try again. Often somebody would be nabbed by the INS or by ICE and then sent back to Mexico, but they try again over and over. This made it like a felony, much more, not felony, but much more difficult. You go to jail for a long time for repeated attempts. This made it much more difficult. Okay. So also ramped up private prisons were ramped up under Obama. Under Obama plan the where's this here? So 2005, 25% of migrants who were detained were held at private prisons. In 2014, it was 62%. So during late Biden, late Bush, but mostly during Obama, private prisons were used much more often. Also, Obama expanded internal enforcement, and that wasn't just at the borders, but they nabbed immigrants more internally, enforce immigration internally in the U.S. And Bush had the Secure Communities Initiative, nabbing undocumented workers and stuff. There's supposedly criminal gangs and stuff was massively ramped up under Obama. Okay, so Trump got in, of course. Trump his first term. I believe he deported something like 1.2 million immigrants. People were rightfully outraged at the child separation policy. People were horrified by this. The Democratic Party opposition was largely, performative. AOC had the really famous. She was a photograph like crying in front of looking through a gated fence. Turned out it was a photo op. The gated fence was in front of a parking lot. It was to take a wide angle lens. It's from a parking lot. It was performative. It was entirely performative. But people were actually outraged at the child separation policies and some of the policies of. And what they did, the ICE would push immigrants out into the desert, and they often died there. This one activist, a school teacher, I forget his name. I wanted to interview him actually, a school teacher who was an activist, and he deliberately dropped like water jugs of water in the desert, food, so these people wouldn't. And the INS arrested him. They kept destroying this, and ICE, I mean, kept destroying this water, the supplies. and they wanted the people who forced down the desert die. So that was pretty horrible. Okay, so Biden got in, Joe Biden administration. So he promised to reverse the policies of Trump. He really didn't. He didn't really do much to legalize the status. By that time, there were 11.3 million undocumented workers. He didn't really do anything for them. He did some like 3.5 million people were naturalized. Were naturalized. That's a good thing, I guess. Um, he did make it easier for asylum seekers to come to stay in the U.S. while they're seeking asylum to avoid deportation. 2021, there were 1.7 million arrests at the border. He something like, let's see here. He deported many more. Oh yeah, he was called the repatriated. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, here we go. So Trump's first term, 1.5 million had deportations. Uh, Biden deported more than that. I'm not sure. Somewhat more than that. Also, massive repatriations. 4.4 million repatriations. I'm not 100% sure the difference between repatriation and deportation, where people like sent back to their home country. 4.4 million. He was called as Obama was called the deporter in chief, Biden was called the repatriator in chief. Massively repatriated people. It's a bit complicated. So when Biden got in, it was expected that immigration policy would be easier. It wouldn't crack down as much. So a lot of these smugglers in Mexico would, say to their immigrants, it's going to be easy to encourage people to try. So there was a greater increase. Also, however, during COVID, and there's something called Title 42, which expelled like casual immigrants. Something like 3 million expulsions from 2020 to 2023 under the Title 42 COVID, and vast majority were under Biden. Article 42 was then overturned and changed in 2023. And a lot of conservatives, even ICE employees, were really upset about this. And there was a surge of immigrants attempting to come into the U.S. after Title 42 was ended, the emergency restrictions. So overall, Biden deported and repatriated many more people than Trump, whatever his original intentions were. It's very hard to get an exact grip on what was going on for like specific how it affected specific people. It was an election year issue. There was I mentioned this earlier video, Aurora, Colorado. There was an apartment complex where mostly Venezuelan people lived, and the owner of the apartment, who turned out to be a New York City slumlord, said he couldn't make repairs because a Venezuelan gang, Trinda Aguala, had taken over. And this doesn't appear to be true. The chief of police of Aurora, who was a Republican, said there's no evidence of this. Other people said that now this gang had taken over a Target parking lot. There were right-wing Twitter accounts that was all over the place for a while, and big outrage about this. And there's talk the Hells Angels biker gang was going to come there and beat back these gangs. It was nonsense, but this was going around. Became an election issue. This guy was a slumlord, just using it as an excuse not to make repairs. There was Springfield, Ohio, which was a hardscrabble working class town. Meatpacking is one of the main industries there. Had a large Haitian community who was there for years, but a newer group of Haitian immigrants came in, and there were reports they were eating people's cats and dogs, eating people's pets. That wasn't a single confirmed case of this happening. Haitian actress did say, actually, it is part of Haitian culture to eat cat meat, and that's okay. I mean, I'm not okay, but I mean, American culture, we eat pork, and pigs are pretty intelligent animals, so I'm not gonna. Although there wasn't a single confirmed case of this actually happening, but Trump mentioned it in one of his speeches, and a conservative right-wing podcast interviewed or a YouTuber interviewed people in some coming out of the unemployment office or the Social Security office in Springfield, and there was some resentment, not against the Haitian people, Haitian immigrants, but it looked like they were being pampered. And I don't look like they had rent subsidies, even grocery subsidies, and looked like they had privileges which average working class people in Springfield didn't have. I have no idea if this is true or not. I have no idea if this is filtered through more right-wing Twitter accounts. I have no idea, but it's a policy of the ruling class to pit. It happened for a long time, over 100 years, to pit immigrants against native-born Americans. This happens a lot. There was some suspicion on the right that there were, Trump had de facto open borders and allowing huge number of immigrants. It doesn't appear to be exactly what happened, but there appeared to be a surge towards this last 2 years of Biden's administration. There were some suspicions, maybe they're going to use it for Democrats, use it for voter fraud. Not immigrants can't vote, but I mean, their name is like a placeholder. There's some odd theories what was going on. I don't know. It became an election year issue. Yeah, okay. Texas, a few months, well, maybe 6, 7 months before the election, it was kind of a political stand of Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, had a standoff with the Biden administration over immigration. There's I believe, Biden administration ruled, I think it was a court order, I believe, that had to keep one immigration checkpoint open, and they closed it. They were like kind of a standoff. They were Fort Sumter vibes, like, is Texas going to violating federal laws? Texas going to actually secede from the Union? As was political theater. There was a conservative comedian, I forget his name, Texas comedian, interesting guy, I forget his name. He even had a video where he talked about, there's this famous one border crossing which got a lot of publicity. It was in the news and this big political wrangling over. But like a couple miles away was another border crossing. The fence was open and there were tracks from ATV, all-terrain vehicles, and motorcycle tracks. People were going in and out of this other border crossing without even, the whole stand was political theater. I mean, Greg Abbott, it was political theater. Okay, so it affected people's lives. There were cases where now, a crisis at the border. There were large numbers of immigrants during this time building up from the Clinton administration where they didn't know what to do with. They eventually become integrated into communities, and I support open borders. I'm totally okay. But, they didn't have facilities for taking care of these people, integrating into them. Also, a huge number of people show up and they don't know what to do with them. And this was a bit of a problem. Some of these poor, hard scrabble communities. Some wealthy communities got really upset at this too. There were cases where one governor, I think, dumped a bunch of immigrants sent a bunch of immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, like rich liberals, and it was bad. They didn't know what to do with them. We don't know we don't have facilities. They're very wealthy people. When they just build a shelter in Martha's Vineyard, that's where Biden is a $2.3 million home in Martha's Vineyard. And there were other states which was unannounced, just bring immigrants to fly them to northern states without announcing it to anyone in these states. The cases like this happen. So that's some of the background. So Trump's second administration, and he says he's going to deport 11. There are now 11.3 million undocumented immigrants, and Trump's going to deport them. For he can't. It's logistically impossible. He absolutely can't. Everybody knows this. A couple things happen. First, he's early on executive order ending birthright citizenship, and it was blocked by the court. Birthright citizenship comes from the 14th Amendment, one of the amendments after the Civil War. Right after the Civil War, Southern states were readmitted into the Union, and then they tried to continue slavery or control of freed black people under different means, the black codes, Jim Crow, the black codes. And so the civil rights amendments were brought in to end slavery, finally end all that. So the 14th Amendment, I think it's the first clause, because anyone born in the U.S. is a U.S. citizen. So Trump people said, well, it only originally applied to slaves, the children of slaves. Well, people push back, say, no, anyone, the wording of it is important. You're born in the U.S. It doesn't matter whether your parents were slaves or not. If you're born in the U.S., you're okay. Anyway, Trump said he's going to end this. It was blocked by the courts. Okay, so there was that going on. Then there was the big, beautiful bill, what's called the Big Beautiful Bill. It's an alliteration, comes from Biden's Build Back Better bill, also an alliteration, which was used by Keir Starmer, finally developing the World Economic Forum. But the bill, so Trump had his own, the Big Beautiful Bill. It's awful. It's passed, but it passed. It's law. Apparently, it's the largest upward transfer of wealth in U.S. history. The previous biggest transfer was the CARES Act. under Trump's previous administration, which Bernie Sanders voted for and AOC voted for. It was an unrecorded voice vote, but it looks like AOC did vote for it, which is also pretty horrible. But for COVID relief and economic stimulus, but there's also a massive upward transfer of wealth. So this Build Back Better bill is the same thing. It anyway massively ramps up the militarization of U.S. society. Let me look it up here. So it provides $170 billion for border enforcement, which is a lot. $45 billion for immigration detention centers. It's the biggest upward transfer of wealth in U.S. history. Our FEMA funding is being diverted, disaster relief is being diverted towards border control. And it's making ICE is now the most highly funded branch of U.S. government in history, massively expanding ICE's powers, ICE's reach. They're apparently hiring another, I believe it's 20,000 ICE employees, massively expanding it. And also the cutbacks in rural health care. Something like between 12 and 17 million people will lose health care. And rural hospitals are closing. And this only is scheduled to come into effect in 2028 after Trump leaves office. And the Democrats did not meaningfully fight back. Chuck Schumer denounced it. They're all denouncing it, of course, but Chuck Schumer could have blocked it in committee. He didn't. They let it pass. They denounced it like Hakeem Jeffries had a filibuster, and Schumer denounced it, how horrible it is, but they didn't really meaningfully oppose it when they could have. And they're not building any mass movement against it either. They're not doing. So there's well-connected firms, private prison firms. Geo Group is a big part of it. Private prison and security outfit. Pam Bondi, who's now Attorney General, was a lobbyist for Geo Group. And there's also Core Civic, another group, same thing, private prison company. These companies benefited pretty well under Biden. Though Biden was kind of mixed, he apparently didn't want to expand private prisons, but he didn't close it down either. They did pretty well under Biden, but the private prisons, they contributed lavishly to Trump. And this is obviously a political payoff to well-connected security firms. So this is going on. So massively ramping up. Max Blumenthal says, massive militarization of U.S. society, and it's disturbing. Okay, so there's the Supreme Court decision in late June. Is Trump versus Casa 6-3 decision. Basically, it's kind of complicated, but stripped federal courts of the right of judicial review. Essentially, according to the World Socialist website, a federal court now can't prevent the executive from action regards unconstitutional. This appears to massively expand president's authority. I believe in his first term, Trump had 67 injunctions. The court tried to block something he did. Other presidents had a few others. Trump, Biden, Obama had 8, something like that. But Trump had 67. So this massively curtails the ability of federal courts to block president's actions, which may be deemed unconstitutional. So this allows Trump to go ahead, allows him to end birthright citizenship, which is, kind of end birthright citizenship. There was actually another Supreme Court ruling, which allows Trump to end the CHNV program. CHNV program was, under Biden, allowing people from, I think it's Cuba, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, allowing the people from these countries to stay in the U.S., and Trump ended that. These people are going to be expelled. I don't know how many people this is going to concern. So, I see massively ramping up power of ICE and the security state. June 9th. June 9th, there was a big several ICE raids in Los Angeles against immigrants. I think they nabbed 1,000 people altogether. There was an incident where immigrants were holed up in a Home Depot, and they were triggered as mass protests. And highly militarized, 1,000 National Guard troops, altogether in that area, 41,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines, which is for this series of ICE raids in one area of Los Angeles. So, this is kind of scary. And there were huge protests. Now, there were protests. Some people on the right-wing Twitter accounts claim this was a color revolution. I don't think it was. I think the protests were organic. I think what may have happened, they deliberately, Trump people wanted to incite conflict. And there were, is reminiscent of BLM. There was pretty, police were beating people, pretty energetic, almost riot situation. It was deliberately provoked. A massive military show of force, and many people, protesters had Mexican flags. And I'm okay with this. I don't support the bourgeois state. I don't give a crap what flag they fly. But some people have suggested someone was passing out these flags deliberately. It was bad optics, deliberately for bad optics. Whole thing may have been engineered for Trump to push his Build Back Better bill. I don't know, but there's some people have theorized about this. So that was going on. The horrible ice raids, massive, and went on. There were protests around the area until early July of this year. Big protest action going on there. May have been like a psyop to promote the big beautiful bill. I don't really know. But July 7th, another ice raid, highly militarized ice raid using armored personnel carriers and heavily troops in riot gear, raided MacArthur Park in Los Angeles. They didn't nab anyone. They didn't get anyone, but the high military show of force was huge. There were helicopters and armored personnel carriers, which is kind of weird. There was a children's education thing which had to be canceled, disrupted people. Okay, there's a YouTube channel I started watching, Colonial Outcast, with Greg Stoker and a guy named Mark Wayne. Greg Stoker is a former U.S. Marine. He was in special operations for a while. He left it and moved to the left. He's an activist. And became famous on TikTok last year talking about the genocide. And he was describing military tactics of the IOF and Hamas, comparing their military. And he's a pretty astute observer. And this YouTube channel is also a podcast on Mid-Press News. He does it with this guy, Mark Wayne. And initially, it was kind of seemed like a little too academic left, like talking about post-colonial theory and stuff, which I'm kind of allergic to the academic left. I kind of like to stay away from that. But I started watching some of it is pretty good. I started watching him, and I got a lot of information from it. Anyway, Mark Wayne, I kind of like his politics a little better than Greg Stoker. They're both okay. They're both really interesting. Mark Wayne said he was talking about this MacArthur Park raid called Operation Excalibur. He was talking about, he thinks it was designed to push us into a civil war, with both sides heavily scripted, deliberately designed to give Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, and Gavin Newsom, governor of California, to make them look good, the opposition. And Karen Bass, she has a background in the left, oddly. She was in the 70s. She was in the Vince Ramos brigades, which organized American leftists visiting Cuba. She organized that, and one point she said she's rooted in revolution and womanism. Whatever that means. Okay, well, I mean, it's a phrase here. But recently she's gotten pretty bad. She's cracked down on homeless people. She advocates massively funding the police. She said many times that the phrase defund police is horrible. She hates defunding the police. She's moved to the right, apparently trying to appeal to wealthy white suburban areas of LA. And okay, anyway, but this whole thing Mark Wayne was describing, this whole thing is engineered. Is this military raid on this park was deliberately engineered to appeal to the Trump's base, the MAGA people on one hand, and liberals on the other hand. Make Karen Bass had she repeated Frantz Fanon or some radical. They made them look like the opposite is pushing the civil with both sides tightly scripted. And I think he's kind of right. He says the answer to this is like a left fight back from a radical left, which is not controlled by the Democratic Party. Now, and Gavin Newsom is a horrible figure. He's so horrible in so many ways. I may make a future video about him. He's pretty horrible. So I think Mark Wayne had some interesting take on this. Karen Bass is kind of like this guy Van Jones, CNN commentator. Started out as a Maoist. Now he's a really horrible liberal. Okay, So the ICE raids continue. They're ongoing, especially in California. There's a raid in Camarillo, California. One person was killed, a worker, Jaime Alanis Garcia. He was a worker on a legal cannabis farm, marijuana farm, and he was running away from ICE. He fell off a greenhouse 30 feet to his death. I don't know how many deaths have occurred so far. I don't really know. Also, article interesting, the UFW, the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez's famous group, they're protesting this, but the World Socialist website points out that they played a horrible role. They were very anti-immigrant. In the 70s, they had this Operation Wet Line, where they would beat up immigrants, undocumented, they would beat them up. People coming in from Mexico, just beat the crap out of them. They played a pretty horrific role. I have disagreements with the World Socialist website, by the way. I don't totally agree with a lot of their politics, but they do have some interesting stuff. I get news from a huge variety of sources. So there's also a California State professor of philosophy and math professor. I believe he's called Jonathan Anthony Caravillo, and he was arrested by a nice protest. The cops claimed he beat up, he assaulted, and the cop, students, people that say he didn't. He was eventually released. Whole separate incident. There was early on, a few months ago. I think it was January. I think it was March. 240 people were deported. They were accused of being members of the MS-13 Venezuelan Salvadoran gang or Trinidad Agualala Venezuelan gang. I talked about this in an earlier video. Without due process. It was blocked by the courts, but Trump did it anyway. Trump said, we didn't get it in time. Sorry. Uh, so they were deported without due process, and there's no definite proof these people were in the gang. Some of them might have been, but they no definite proof of it. There's known several people were illegally deported, really. So there was one figure, Kilmar Arrego Garcia, who he was legally in the U.S., by the way, totally legal. As far as I know, he's legally in the U.S. And the senator from Maryland, I forget his name, senator from Maryland, Chris Van Hollen took an interest in this case, went to El Salvador, and got him back. He's still facing a charge. Garcia is facing a charge for supposedly helping immigrants get into the U.S. and might eventually be deported. But anyway, they're deported to CCOT, which is a horrible private prison in El Salvador. That's a whole weird story. The president of El Salvador, Ayoub Bakuli, interesting character. He's Palestinian background. He was originally on the left. He came out of politics with the FMLN, which came out of the guerrilla movement in the 80s. However, by now it's very corrupt. It's nothing like it was in the 80s. Very corrupt, neoliberal. The two main parties are Arena, which came out of the 80s, Arena Party by Roberto Daubisan, who was a right-wing figure in El Salvador, and then the FMLN, but they're both really corrupt, both really unpopular. So anyway, Bukele left the FMLN, moved to the right. He now El Salvador had a huge gang problem, and he cracked down. Vicious human rights abuse. It's like 84,000 Salvadorans without due process. Many of them tortured or killed. But he ended the story. Made a secret deal with MS-13 gang. Made some backroom deal to help quash it. But he did end the gang violence, and he's become something of a folk hero in El Salvador, like Duterte in Philippines, who had horrific human rights abuses, but he ended some of the violence. So I don't know. So okay, so that's been going on. There are a few other people. There was a prisoner exchange with these 240 people. I think 200 people were Venezuelan and were allowed to go to Venezuela. Many were released, and Maduro said massive human rights abuses. Many people were innocent or not even charged with anything. So there was something of a prisoner exchange. Venezuela released some American prisoners they had. So, kind of worked out a little better than it could have, but it's still pretty horrible. Okay, so next thing, ICE has ties to U.S. intelligence, to Israeli intelligence. Podcast, or one of the video, or a mid-press podcast by Greg Stokers, From Tiger Teams to Concentration Camps, talks about a lot of this. So he says early 2025, ICE assembled a covert unit supposedly to address national security fronts, the national security threats. There's leaked testimony came out, recorded at least over 100 surveillance reports targeting student activists in the U.S., mainly who were pro-Palestinian. And they used, apparently, it's based on a list of 5,000 names, which were provided mostly by this group called Canary Mission, which is a Zionist group, and they specialize in doxing and harassing pro-Palestinian activists. And many of these people there's a lot of mistake. None of these people are not even pro-Palestinian activists, but they're doxing, attempting to ruin people's careers, activist organizers, and so on, sometimes without any evidence. But they apparently gave this list of names of student activists, gave it to ICE, and they used that to deport people. Uh, uh, um, yeah, so another tie, a former deputy director of ICE, Peter Edge, who retired recently, but he is known. He attended a seminar given by the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, Zionist group in Israel. And these seminars are pretty horrible. They encourage human rights abuses. They deliberately encourage brutality. He's known to have attended one of these. So there are links. There are some big links. Also, 2024, Wired magazine reported that ICE had the HSI, the Homeland Security Investigation Unit of ICE, has a $2 million contract with Paragon, which is an Israeli surveillance firm. Uh, Paragon came out with what's called Unit 8200. It's a unit of the IDF or IOF, which is like Israel's version of the National Security Administration, the Security and Surveillance Unit. And they're big presence, offshoots have a presence in Silicon Valley, by the way. So it is known that ICE has a $2 million contract with Paragon. Ehud Barak, former Israeli prime minister, is by part of Paragon, and he's also connected to Epstein. Also, there's another connection there. And Greg Stoker other writers talked about what's called Zen City. It's basically an Israeli analytics firm. It's supposed to gauge, from social media, how people feel about their cities. And it's supposed to be a much less intrusive way of surveilling people. Pet peeve, the term Zen is massively misused by Silicon Valley. Zen is a sect of Buddhism developed during the Tang Dynasty in China. Originally it was Chan. It was developed in China, actually. There's several versions of it. Went to Japan, called Zen in Japan. The Japanese version is much more militaristic. Anyway, it's supposed to be Chan or Zen. It's supposed to be like a purified Buddhism, like pure transmission of enlightenment beyond dogma, pure transmission. But anyway, more militarized version went to Japan, was adopted by the samurai aristocracy. Then versions of it went to like a northern East Asia, Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. The dominant forms of Buddhism are offshoots of Zen or Chan in different ways. So anyway, the term U.S. colloquial sense means like calm, Zen. So yeah, I have a website. I used to have a website, a blog. It was hosted by Laughing Squid firm, and they seem like a good firm. And I still have the files. I might restart the blog. I haven't done anything with it in a while. I still have the files. But anyway, the help desk is called the Zen Desk. When you need help, you send to a Zen Desk. And okay. But then I looked around. All software firms have a Zen Desk. That's used in Silicon Valley for their help desk, called Zen Desk. It's sort of annoying this term is massively misused, but okay, a pet peeve I have. Anyway, so Zen Cities Initiative is another Israeli surveillance initiative. It's kind of disturbing. Now there are deportations of students. ICE deportation of students. I don't have the exact numbers. As of April 2025, over 1,000 international students were deported. And May this year, 2,000 student visas were canceled. And many of these people are activists deported for their pro-Palestinian solidarity. Big famous case, Mahmoud Khalil, who was a grad student in Columbia. He had recently graduated. He was the coordinator when they had the encampments negotiated between the encampments and the Columbia administration. And apparently, according to the Gray Zone, he had actually worked for the British and sort of regime change stuff in Syria, but just they might still have solidarity with this guy. So total solidarity was Palestinian work, and he was nabbed and sent to undisclosed. Nobody knew where he was for like a week or so. Apparently, he was discovered in the ICE detention facility in Louisiana, in a remote part of Louisiana. This is used because the federal judge there is more sympathetic. They chose it, and he was disappeared for like a week. They finally located him. He finally got out. He had a really good lawyer, and he got out. He reestablished. So that was pretty egregious. Another case, Ramisa Öztürk. She's a Turkish student. Oh, by the way, Mahmoud Khalil. Yeah, he had a U.S. visa. He was had a green card, legal resident green card. He's married to an American. His wife was a U.S. citizen who was pregnant, by the way. What a horrible thing to happen to him when this is going on. So he's pregnant while this is going on. He's married to a U.S. citizen. Another case was Ramisa Öztürk, who was a Turkish student. She was here at Tufts University outside Boston. She was here on a student visa. She wasn't really, as I understand, really an activist. She just co-wrote an editorial for the student newspaper criticizing the Tufts pro-Israeli policies. They own investments in Israel. She denounced this in her editorial. She was nabbed by ICE people who were wearing baklavas. It was pretty brutal. They couldn't see their face. They just ran to her, approached her, just shoved her in a car. Again, she was disappeared. No one knew where she was. Again, she was found and traced to the detention facility in Louisiana. She has been released. I think she's out pending a decision. Like they may still deport her pending a decision. And one more case, another case was Mohsen Madawi, who a Palestinian American. He's been living in Vermont. He was a student at Columbia, but he was a Vermont resident, and they got him at his citizenship hearing in Colchester, Vermont, which is a suburb of Burlington. They nabbed him at his citizenship hearing. This happened a bunch of other times as well, and he has been released. I'm not sure of the current case. He's a Buddhist. He was active in the Buddhist community in Vermont, in Barnet, Vermont, like in the Northeast Kingdom or Northern Vermont. There's several different Buddhist groups have centers there, and he was teaching meditation classes at Columbia. Yeah, interesting guy. Interesting. So they got him. Now, another thing, finally, they're talking about denaturalization, like for immigrants who become U.S. citizens, basically a process of stripping them of their citizenship. And this has happened. This has happened back in the day more often. Between 1907 and 1967, something like 22,000 Americans have been denaturalized. And I don't know. I assume a lot of this happened during the Cold War period, but during McCarthyism, people were denaturalized for supposedly being Soviet spies or having Communist Party connections in Europe or something like that. But I don't have all the details. After 1967, it became more unusual. It's highly unusual. It does happen, but it's how people denaturalized for lying about their citizenship application, being guilty of war crimes or genocide, or being involved in organized crime. Since 1967, according to Wikipedia, since the Second World War, 107 people have been denaturalized, mostly for Nazi war crimes. Mostly Nazi war crimes. Seems like some of these people were allowed to come to the U.S. under like Operation Paperclip, then was no longer convenient. The U.S. cracked down on them, but something like that. So a few months ago, the Trump administration issued a memo to the Justice Department to tell them to prioritize denaturalization procedures against U.S. citizens, immigrant citizens who either were at criminal background or posed a security risk. As far as I know, this hasn't happened yet, but it probably will happen. Now, will it happen? Will U.S. citizens be stripped of their citizenship for pro-Palestinian activism? This could be. Hasn't happened yet as far as I know, but we are close to this happening. And Trump said when he signed this thing, he might even deport like native-born U.S. citizens for being, and that's scary. Kristi Noem said something like this. The DHS, Department of Homeland Security, she's even during the campaign, she said something like this. And they may start sending people like me to Gaza. I mean, it's not inconceivable. And the Democrats are not, they're fully okay with this. They're putting up a token opposition, sometimes making a lot of noise. Hakeem Jeffries has filibuster, and Cory Booker had this like 19-hour filibuster. It was performative. Seriously. They're not meaningfully opposing this. They're totally okay with ramping up the security state. So interesting to see how this goes. We may be reaching the end game of bourgeois democracy. Again, both parties are totally okay with it. And we'll see how it goes. It's not just Trump, and Trump's awful, of course, but this would have happened under Hillary. Probably would have happened under the Democrats if Biden or Kamala Harris had gotten back in, but more slower. Same thing would have happened, but more slower. It's ramping up. Now, final thing, So Trump's war against Trump said he's not going to, recently said he's not going to go after immigrants, agricultural workers, hotel workers, or farm workers, which are a large part of immigrant population, which means there are about 11 million undocumented workers now. At the end of Trump leaves office, there'll also be 11 million undocumented workers. This is performative. I mean, it's hurting people's lives. I don't say that, but I mean, he's not even getting. I mean, Biden deported, already deported more people than Trump. Even his base, Trump is even cheating. His base is not getting what they want. This is performative, and the Democrats are putting up a performative opposition. What the purpose of this whole thing is to ramp up the security state, keep these people terrified, ramp up the security state, militarization of U.S. society, pay off to well-connected prison industrial complex, GeoCorp, and so on, payoffs to them, and ramp up repression, militarization, crackdown, freedom of speech. That's the real reason for this whole thing. Not even really against immigrants. Trump doesn't really care that much. I mean, it is hurting people, don't get me wrong. But one of the main purposes is to crack down on freedom of speech, anti-genocide protesters, crack down on all that. So my hunch, that's where this is going. And if you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. I hope this isn't too long. I don't know how long I've been. My dogs are getting anxious for a walk. And I'll see you later. Talk to you later. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.